In this video, we're going to go over how to place dimensions in AutoCAD, as well as how to play around with some of the styles regarding dimensions. So first off, I'll go over how you'll get your dimensions, which are your measurements, like this, placed into your drawings. So these are actually all, they're not separate pieces of lines or little triangles that I drew and bits of text. It's just an actual dimension placed in the drawing, so I don't have to worry about taking that measurement out of it, because a lot of that stuff is going to get done automatically. So from your dimension reading, it went over things about the size of the text and the break between the dimension and the dimension line, the size of the arrowhead, the extension line, the break between the object and the extension line, it going past. All of those things, a lot of them can be done automatically using the dimension tool in AutoCAD, which is wonderful and nifty. And so your project, or rather your assignment, is going to be dimensioning these 12 objects, and I'm going to go through a few of them with you. We'll do this one and this one for sure, maybe do another one, or just kind of parts of it, just to go over kind of how the dimension tool works. And then we'll look at the styles. So there's two different ways you can access the dimension tool. In the home toolbar, right up at the top, we've got this little annotation area where we've got the quick dimension tool, which I'm not a huge fan of, but we'll go over how to use it. And then over here, we've got a smaller button where if I also click on that, I can have my drop down of the different types of dimension. I prefer this method a bit more, just because this gives me more control of saying specifically what type of dimension I want. With the quick dimension tool, it's going to try to make a lot of guesses for you of what you want to do, and it oftentimes is right, but then when it doesn't do what you anticipated it to do or what you wanted it to do, that can sometimes get frustrating. And it could also be that I'm just not a huge fan of this tool because they added it after I had already learned AutoCAD. So maybe then I just never got used to it. Who knows? So this is one way you can access your dimension features. The other way is there's actually a completely different toolbar. So if I come up here and click on the word annotate, I now have a different toolbar that has more annotation tools, so I can add in just plain blocks of text. I can add in my quick dimensions. I've got other types of dimensions I can choose from. And then also some things regarding circles and center lines that I can easily add into my drawings. I can add in tables of information if I needed to. So within this annotation tab, I have a couple of more different features readily available up at the top. So first we'll look at that kind of quick dimension tool, where if I click on it, it gives me some options down in the command bar where I can switch between different types of dimensions, but it's going to guess and assume what I want to dimension. So if I hover over lines, it starts to give me some linear dimensions associated with those lines, because it's assuming what I want to dimension. And if I click on this line, then it places the dimension, and then I need to move my cursor off of it and click again to place it itself. Now, where the kind of tricky part may come in is when I then want to place an overall height dimension for this object. So if I click here to here, we can see that it's making an aligned dimension between those 2 points. So if I want to make it linear or kind of unilateral with my object, I just need to move my cursor down. So when I move my cursor down, it then will make it so that it's unilateral and a vertical dimension. If I move my cursor all the way up, it's now showing me what that unilateral dimension is across. However, there's an issue happening in that corner with my extension line, so I don't want to place that dimension. I just want to place it here. And again, I'll just click to place the dimension. And I want to make sure too that I'm putting this overall dimension on the outside of this smaller one. Now, from your reading, you hopefully learned that you don't need to place a dimension that tells me what this is from here to here. And again, I'll just move my cursor down. I don't need that dimension placed there because I already have a dimension telling me this is 2.5 and that overall is 4. So I don't need a dimension telling me this is 1.5. I was just pointing at it with my finger. You can't see that. Because I already can figure out from that overall one. So I'm just going to hit escape to end the dimension tool, click on this guy, and hit the delete key on my keyboard to delete it. Now what I prefer more are just using these types of dimensions here for like my linear ones. So I'll just say I want a linear dimension, click on one point, click on another point, and then click to move my cursor up, or move my cursor up and click to place it. So this way it already is knowing that that's the type of dimension I want, so I don't have to go from an aligned one to a linear one. Now AutoCAD is also going to do some helpful things for you. So since this dimension here is too small to fit in that gap, it placed the leader on the outside. However, if I wanted to switch anything about it, I can click on the dimension itself, and then I can click on that grip, and I can force it to be in the middle if I want to, or I can move it to this side. So for me, it might be easier to have it on that side. And then once I'm all done, I'll just hit escape. And again, I'll just place a linear dimension, and I'll go on this side. Now I would like for these two to be aligned with each other. And so then if I actually just click on that object snap, it'll make it that these two are nice and aligned to just make it a little bit easier for reading. And then for one last dimension, I'll just do a linear dimension from absolute edge to absolute edge, and all the way up, click to place. So that way I have an overall dimension, and I want to make sure that it's a little bit further out than other ones. If the dimensions are a little hard for you to read on your drawing, you can also feel free to, in the Home tab, just do them all in a different color. So if you wanted to do them in red to make it a little easier, here I'll switch mine over. So I'm just windowing around a bunch of them that I placed, and I'll change their color over to red, which, whoops. However, if you switch that properties color over to begin with, and escape. So if without having anything selected, if I switch this properties object color to, instead of being by layer, to just being red, then dimensions will get placed in red automatically. So if I have objects that have curves or circles to them, I also need to keep in mind that I need to place location dimensions as well as either a diameter or a radius dimension, depending on what it is. So if it's an object that just is curved but not a full circle, then it gets a radius, versus objects that are full circles, whether it's a hole or just kind of the outside of a piece, would get a diameter. So a nice thing with this quick dimension tool is that it knows that rule. So if let me move this over so you can see it. If I hover over this, we can see that it's going to automatically put a radius on here, versus if I hover over this one, it's automatically putting a diameter. So it does know which one needs to be used where. But again, if I wanted to switch between the two of them, so let me just hit escape to end this quick dimension tool, I can click on this little drop down and I can say I want a diameter radius, click on the circle, and then it'll add my leader, it'll add the diameter symbol, and it'll put it there as well as a little center mark. If I wanted a radius, I'll just click on that little drop down, radius, click on the arc I want to dimension, click to place it. Now, sometimes you might have multiple pieces of information or multiple kind of dimensions that are referring to similar parts or objects. So for instance, this has that same radius down here, same diameter here, and rather than placing that dimension several times, I might just want to put, like ×2 or ×6, depending on how many times it's in my drawing. So with that, I can just double click on any piece of text or any dimension, and I could either completely get rid of it and just type in whatever I wanted in here. So for instance, if I wanted this to just say, that this was typical, or maybe I'm just referring to that this is dimension A versus dimension B. If I had an object that was the exact same shape, but maybe just at 4 different scales, and then I just wanted to make a tabulated chart about which dimensions were what, I could type in whatever I want there. But in this case, I do want it to say that it has a radius of 1 and that there's just 2 of them. And then I'll just click outside of that text editor to finish it. And then again, I can double click on this one. And I'm just going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard to just kind of move myself off of highlighting this text, if it'll let me. And then I can put a space, ×2. And if the text is too big to fit in the text box, you can just increase that text box width. And you can either hit escape or close editor, and then it kind of just added that piece of information in. And so I have how big this radius is, as well as this one. I have the diameter of that hole. And then I just need a location for it. So I'm going to place a linear dimension from center to center, place it out. And in this instance, see how my extension line kind of sits on awkwardly on this center mark? So I'm actually going to take the grip of that and just move it out. So I just took the grip from the center to go to that end of the center mark and hit escape, so that way there's just a nice gap there. And that's all I would technically need for this one. I don't need anything that says, or dimension wise, all I would need for this one, I don't need anything that says how far out this is, because it's just the radius, since these are concentric circles. I can also add in features like center marks. So that's in the Annotate toolbar. If I click on the center mark tool and click on my circle, it'll add center marks in. And then again, I can move my grips to be at the edge of the center marks. So you always want to make sure that your grips are leaving a gap between what they're dimensioning. This way they're not overlapping and could be accidentally mistaken for part of the object itself. So for your assignment, you're going to dimension all of the drawings on this sheet. There's 12 in total. You're going to add in the dimensions as necessary. And things that you can also change around in your drawing. Now, some of them I changed for you automatically, but things related to your dimension units and just how your units kind of appear. So I could click on a dimension itself that I placed, and we can see here in the properties bar that it is telling me that this is a rotated dimension because of how I placed this particular linear one. And it's telling me the color of it. So if I wanted to switch this to a different color, I could. If I wanted to change the way the arrowheads look, so if I wanted the arrows to be open instead of closed, I can change that. I can change the size of the arrowhead. I can change the type of line that the dimension sits on. I can change the amount of space between the break and the object itself. So for instance, if I wanted to change this extension line offset, I can make it 0.25, enter, and now we can see that there's a 0.25 break between that. Other things I can switch are things like the precision here, so it's going to 2 decimal points, which we're not going to see much of a difference here. But let's say I make it to 4 decimal points. If I come here and take this suppressed trailing zeros off, then we can see that it added more numbers to it. So maybe if this was a kind of longer decimal point, and I switch that precision from 2 decimal points to 4, it would then show me more of the number. But in this case, since it was just 2.5, it just gave me some more zeros there. And that's why I have it set to just suppress those trailing zeros, so that this way, if a number does have several zeros on it, I don't need to see necessarily every single one of them as I go. However, using the properties bar to change things related to the dimension and those properties only really works if you just want to change one specific dimension. So if I only wanted to change things related to this dimension and not any of the other ones, the properties bar would be the way to go. If I just want to update all of my dimensions to have kind of a similar style to them, then the way I'd want to do that is through the dimension styles. And you can get to dimension styles 2 ways. One would be in the Annotate toolbar. If you click on this little arrow right here in the corner of this dimensions panel, this will open up your dimension styles. The other way you can do it is to type in the command DIMSTY, all one word, and that'll open up the same dimension style panel. So those are the 2 ways you can get there. And in the dimension styles manager, we can make different types of dimension styles, or we can modify the one we currently have by clicking on the word modify. And this is where I can change lots of different features associated with my dimension styles. So I can change my units. So if I was doing an architectural drawing, I'd want my dimensions to be in feet and inches. In this case, I wouldn't want that, but we can see here kind of how it updated. Or maybe if I was doing something that called for fractional inches, I can do it in fractions. But I want to leave mine in decimal, and I can change the precision to be a different decimal point. And then I can have it where it suppresses leading or trailing zeros. Now we never want to suppress leading zeros, so we learned in our dimension reading that like if a 0 comes before a decimal point or a number is less than 1, we want to make sure that decimal point is there. So we don't actually want to check that off really ever. But trailing zeros, sometimes we might want to. And we can also, on this one, we can round numbers off if we want to. Now, when it comes to some of these other tabs in here that we may want to change, we're not gonna for this particular project. I just want to show you. So what I'm doing right now, you don't have to do to your drawing, but I do want you to just kind of take the information in a little bit. So you can choose it for how you want your numbers to fit in there. So if there isn't enough room to place the text and arrows inside of the dimension line, they're asking, what do you want to move outside first? So I could say that I just always put the text on the outside and leave the arrows and lines in there. Move both of them on the outside. Do either. Do just the arrows. Or I don't care what you have to do, but just always keep it in there. I'll usually just leave it at either. If I'm doing an architectural drawing, I'll usually want to say put the text on the outside. And I'll usually want to put it over a dimension line as well. So things like that we can fit with our text. So we can say with our text placement to say, like, put my text above a dimension. Oh, not that. Don't know why I'd want to make it upside down. I'm just playing around with things now a little bit. I can say if I want it to be aligned with my dimension, or just always horizontal. We want to keep it always horizontal for this style drawing, but again, if I was doing architectural drawings, I'd say I would want them to be aligned. We can change our text style too. So in here, I can change my font. So maybe if I wanted it to be more like architectural lettering, I can change the font in here. So there's kind of two fonts preloaded on most computers called City Blueprint and Country Blueprint, which we'll go over. That'll look kind of like hand lettering, but typically in drawings we leave it as that Arial font because it's easy to read. I can change the text height, so it's currently sitting at a little under 1/4 of an inch. It's about 3/8 of an inch in text height. We can change it to be larger. So again, if I was doing architectural drawings, if my text is only 3/8 of an inch tall and my building is 50 feet long, I'm not going to see it. So I'd want to change that text height to be much larger if I was doing architectural drawings. And I could change those symbols. So I can change the symbols to be whatever I want. Again, with architectural drawings, I'd probably want them to be at this tick. And I could change the size of them. So I'm just going to highlight that and just change it to be, 0.75 if that's what I wanted. That's what I can get. This is going to look a little bit messy right now, but just don't worry about it. And within my lines too, I can offset the origin. So that's how much of a break between your extension line and the object, how much the extension line goes beyond the dimension. So you can change those numbers up and things like that if I wanted them to extend beyond the tick. So a lot of times in architectural drawings, I might change this to be 1.25 or just a little bit going past it. And for now, I'll just change those things up. So this is how you can change things related to the lines and your spacing, your arrowheads, your font itself and how it's placed, your units and your precision for it. So I have it to do to 4 decimal places and not suppress trailing zeros. And I'm just going to click OK and close, and we can see how all of my dimensions updated to those new settings. So rather than having to go do all of these individually, they just all updated to have that dimension style, to have the dimension line extend a little bit past these giant architectural ticks. The only one that didn't update was this one, and that's because with this one I had done an override in here with these properties. So because I had overridden several of these factors, it went by what I specified here instead of what the standard has. So if I ever wanted to just update all of them, DIMSTY or the dimension styles would be the way to go. I'm just going to Control Z to get back to what it looked like before because I don't want it to look like that. That was not very good looking. That was kind of ugly. But that's how the dimension styles works and how you can use them, as well as just the general dimension tools. So now it is your turn to practice using your dimension tools within the file provided. Make sure when you're done, you go to Save As, and make sure you're saving it to your flash drive. Otherwise, you won't be able to upload it to Canvas for your submission. And of course, if you have any questions, please reach out.